welcome back to another episode of the Chicana Therapist. I'm your host, Dr. Xochilt Alamillo, and today we're talking about something a lot of us have lived, but maybe never had language for, and that is bare minimum relationships. So when the bare minimum is normalized, I'm talking about mostly hetero relationships because I'm going to be talking about the patriarchy and how that shows up. So I'm going to mostly be talking to people who date men. I want to talk about how the bare minimum from men is normalized. We're going to talk about where the pattern actually comes from, culturally, generationally, and how it shows up in relationships without us even knowing it. And by the end of the episode, I'm going to leave you with some questions that I would like for you to actually sit with. Not to judge your relationship, but to look at it clearly, because I hear this a lot in my therapy practice. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, quédate. And let me say this now before we go any further. This is not a case against traditional relationships. If you and your partner sat down, both of you consented to choose a certain shape for your relationship together, like who provides, who manages the home, how the roles are divided, and that was a real mutual choice, that is not what I'm talking about today. This is more about the roles that we never actually chose, the ones we inherited and just thought were normal porque así se hace. So hold on to that distinction as we go because it's going to matter a lot by the time we get to the end. All right, so let's talk about where this idea of accepting bare minimum relationship comes from, because they don't happen just because many of us were actually culturally trained for this on both sides. I've mentioned the word marianismo a lot on my podcast. So even if you didn't have a name for it growing up, it's this idea that a woman's role is to be self-sacrificing, endlessly patient, and they're supposed to be the emotional and moral center of the home. And oftentimes devotion gets measured by how much you give up, not by how much you receive or what you receive. And the more you endure quietly, the more good, quote unquote, you are. And then there's the counterpart that I've also mentioned a lot on the podcast, machismo, patriarchal norms that taught the men in our lives, in our culture, to live the opposite, right? That showing up minimally was enough. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if a man is not cheating, if they're not hitting or using physical violence, the fact that they work and have a job, eso ya es suficiente. They might just go to work, do their job, bring home the paycheck, and that really is all that was expected of them because a woman is in charge of everything else, right? And that might have worked in times when, only the men worked outside of the home and the women tended to stay home with children or with the family and do all the household things. So anyway, you've got two sides of the same system. A floor for men that's low, and basically no floor at all for what women were allowed to need. And some of us watched this play out before we ever lived it. We watched our moms, our abuelitas. They were over-functioning. They were staying quiet. They were absorbing. They were in charge of everyone in the household's emotions and in charge of all the duties, while the men really got praised for doing so much less. And I'm not saying this to villainize anybody. I'm just naming the system that shaped both roles because both of them were shaped. Make no mistake. And you probably grew up hearing this or even hear it now. I hear it a lot now. This idea of al menos no toma. At least he's not a drunk. Or at least he's not a cheater. Por lo menos no es mujeriego. Or you hear así son los hombres. That's just how men are. Or uno tiene que aguantar. We just have to take it as women, as wives. And chances are that if you're in a relationship right now that feels like this, you might still be hearing versions of it, but from your partner. Ay, ¿qué más quieres? I'm here, aren't I? I don't cheat. I don't hit you. What more do you want? Or they sometimes say like, oh, at least I'm not like your sister's partner. Or at least I'm not like your friend's partner. You don't see me doing what they do. Or maybe they'll tell you, that's just how I am. Things aren't going to change, like it or not. Or the ever popular, you're just too sensitive. You're too much. You ask for too much. Or they sometimes even say, like, my dad never did any of this stuff either, and my mom never complained. And I want to take a minute and name that even men who aren't cheating, even men who aren't cruel, men who genuinely love their partners, they still benefit from the patriarchy, from the system. And that can make us uncomfortable because benefiting from the system doesn't require a man to be bad. It just requires the bar to stay low enough that ordinary or bare minimum efforts start to look like exceptional. Think about it. Sometimes when basic participation in having a home, in having kids, things like splitting the household chores, or even just being emotionally present, or remembering important things that matter to you. Sometimes you hear that gets received as like generous, like, oh, you're so lucky. It's not expected. So I hear a lot of women like, you're so lucky that your partner helps with the house, helps, right? Not participates because both people live in the home, but you're so lucky that he, quote unquote, helps with the kids. And all of that, when being bare minimum is seen as like, oh, wow, that's the patriarchy. That's the system working for him, even if he's not one of the quote unquote bad guys. That's whether he asked for it or not. So this whole idea of at least he's not like insert some other guy, that's not a relationship standard. It shouldn't be a relationship standard. That's a patriarchal benchmark. And it grades good men on a curve that was never fair to begin with. And none of this is about turning men into villains. Benefiting from a system and actively upholding one, those aren't the same thing. So you can be a good man and still be standing on a foundation that was built to ask less of you than it asks of your partner. So when you put that all together, women are trained to expect little. Men trained that little was sufficient, and that if they went above that, that it was exceptional, and that they should be acknowledged and thanked for it. And all of that makes for this whole culture that we have going on when it's around like bare minimum relationships. So if that's where the bar came from, let's look at how this can show up in relationships, and let's look at what gets called a quote unquote good relationship and what reciprocity actually requires. So I'll walk through a few different areas where it can show up, because this idea of bare minimum doesn't just show up one way, it shows up in a lot of ways. So for example, in emotional labor, normalized looks like she remembers his family's birthdays. So she's got everyone's birthdays on her calendar. She manages the social calendar. Invitations go through her. She figures out what the gift is going to be, what time they're going to leave, what they're going to wear. And many times, if there's children in the relationship, she's the one in charge of when the children want to talk about feelings, because he doesn't do that. He only plays with them or disciplines them. She's the one telling them, hey, you should call your mom, you should call your sister, that kind of thing. Now, what reciprocal looks like is that he does that too. Unprompted, nobody has to ask him to take care of things. They do it together. They both keep track of birthdays and their social calendar and who's going to take care of what, and who's going to talk to kids about emotions, that kind of thing. Another place I see it a lot is household and logistics. What's normalized is that she's carrying the mental load. So she's the one who plans the meals, picks up the groceries, makes lists of groceries, knows all the appointments for everyone in the family, all the planning, remembering everything, what needs done. And he, quote unquote, helps when he's asked. Reciprocal looks like he can track it on his own. He doesn't need to be assigned a task to knows it needs doing. He doesn't need to be told what things need to be done and when they need to be done by. He is a active participant in running the household. Another area where it shows up is conflict and repair in the relationship. So what's normalized is that she's the one who starts all the hard conversation. She translates the emotion. She has to apologize or bring it up first just to keep the peace. But what reciprocal should look like is that he also initiates repair. He can sit in discomfort without shutting down or walking away. He can handle feedback and can give feedback in a healthy way. Another area I see impacted is affection and attention. So what's normalized is that he might do big gestures on her birthday or an anniversary, and everything in between is just quiet. And that's, again, like bare minimum, right? Because some people don't even get that. But reciprocal should look like small, consistent effort, not just performance on demand or on the days that it's going to be put on social media, on the days that's expected of him, but just being affectionate and giving attention just because. Small, consistent efforts. Another area is goal support. So what's normalized is that she cheers him on. She restructures her whole life around his career, his needs, what he's going for. But reciprocal should look like he does that for her too. He supports her goals. He is willing to restructure things around her career if needed. So those are a few areas that I see come up a lot when it comes to this idea of bare minimum relationships and what reciprocal would look like. So I invite you to ask yourself, if you're in a relationship, pay attention to when you catch yourself saying, well, at least he's not ... or at least he doesn't, or at least he does. At least when you use those words, it's usually the sound of the bare minimum getting defended as a strength, and it really doesn't need to be. I said this at the beginning, but I want to come back to it because I think it matters, especially after you've heard these examples. This isn't like a scorekeeping thing. It's definitely not a case against traditional roles, because I know plenty of people who have chosen to be in more traditional roles. So again, if you and your partner looked at things like emotional labor, household labor, or whatever it is, and you made a real choice on how to divide them, and you both had a vote, that's not bare minimum. That's just a partnership that has its own shape that both people consented to. So the test was never really like, is this traditional? Because I don't want traditional. The test is more like, was reciprocity ever actually even on the table? Did I choose this, or was it expected of me? So none of what I just walked through is about tallying things up. I don't think that there ever really is a relationship that's truly 50-50, at least not all the time. I know that some people take up more of the work because they prefer it that way for different reasons. For example, you might take up the paying bills, for example, because maybe you're better at it, and maybe you prefer to be the one to take care of all the groceries because you don't like what the other one picks or something like that, right? It's not ever going to be about 50-50. It's more about, are you both having these conversations and feel supported where you need to be supported? So I have a few questions for you to self-reflect if you want to, and I'm going to group them into a few areas. The first, I want you to think about origin. Where did this idea of what a relationship has to look like actually come from for you? Ask yourself, did I choose this, or did I inherit it without ever really noticing? Where did I first learn that this type of relationship was normal? Whose voice is that when I tell myself, well, at least he's not ... Is that my voice, or is it someone else's? Another area is reciprocity. What's the actual trade? If I sat down and list everything I give and everything I receive, would it hold up as a fair trade? Who initiates? Who does the repair, the planning, the remember it? Is it always me, or does he do that too? And another one is permission. And this one's a little harder. I want you to ask yourself, have I ever asked for more and been told I was asking for too much? Do I feel guilty wanting more than what I have right now? And if I'm honest, do I believe I'm allowed to want more? Fourth, I want you to think about comparison. Am I grading him against other men, against what I've seen, what I've heard, what my friends have? Or am I grading this relationship against what I actually need? At least he's not like ... the standard that I'm using? Or is this all based on what I want, regardless of what everybody else has or gives. And these questions aren't meant to make you feel bad. They're meant to get you thinking, because a lot of us have never been given permission to even ask questions like this. And sometimes that's the only thing that's missing. So I encourage you to sit with these questions. Let them be uncomfortable if they need to be. That discomfort isn't the problem. It's information. It's telling you something. All right, so let's bring this back. Remember that reciprocity isn't extra. It's not a bonus. It's not even romantic. It's not something you should have to earn or negotiate for. It's the baseline. It's the thing that both marianismo and machismo trained us, both sides of us, not to expect in the first place. And reciprocity doesn't have to look like anything dramatic or a grand gesture. It's the small, consistent things that count. He notices without being asked. He repairs without needing to be managed. He shows up for you the way you show up for him, even if it's small, but it's unprompted and it's a mutual thing. Now, for those of you listening who are in a relationship with more traditional roles that you actually chose together, this isn't asking you to abandon that, but I am asking you to check in with yourself every so often. Is this still what I want? Because you do get to change your mind. What that means, that's something that you have to really think about and talk about with your partner. But sometimes we enter relationships thinking they should look a certain way and that we want them to look a certain way. And 20 years later, that's not what we want anymore. We're different people and we want different things. And those of you who are listening that hear yourselves in a lot of what we talked about today, maybe you're recognizing the bare minimum in your relationship. Please don't blow anything up tonight. I'm asking you to just stop calling the floor a ceiling. That's it. That's the whole ask for today. Because we have to remember that this kind of work is generational work. And I want to be really clear that this isn't about blaming our moms or our tias or our abuelas who survived with what they had. I believe most of them did the best they could with whatever tools they had. But we get to choose differently for ourselves and for whoever's watching us in these relationships, our kids, our sisters, our comadres. We get to choose not to hand down the same low bar and call it love. So you don't have to do anything drastic. You don't have to finish this episode and start asking for more immediately. You just have to stop calling less than that a gift. Stop calling the bare minimum a gift. Thanks again for joining me on this episode. I hope it was useful and that it resonated with a lot of you. As a reminder, if you want to keep up with everything that I offer, including podcasts, retreats, other things, then you want to sign up for my newsletter. You can do that at my website, thechicanatherapist.com, and sign up for the newsletter. You'll be told every time a new podcast episode comes out, a new blog, any retreats I'm having. We have sold out of our Oaxaca retreat in September. So thank you to everyone who is going to join us and who spread the word. We are planning on having more retreats moving forward. We're hoping to have one in March. The place is yet to be determined, and we are planning on having another Oaxaca retreat next year. So please make sure to sign up for the newsletters so you can stay informed. I'm also on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me there and interact, I would really appreciate it. And as always, I really appreciate when you share this podcast with other people who might benefit from it. And if you leave a rating wherever you listen to your podcast, that helps other people find the podcast. Again, thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Cuídense mucho. Thank you for listening. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing shared in this podcast constitutes therapy, clinical advice, or a therapeutic relationship. Listening to this podcast does not establish a provider-client relationship, and if you're experiencing a mental health crisis or in need of clinical support, please contact a licensed mental health professional or call or text 988 Crisis Hotline.